welcome to Sleepy Story Facts, where tonight's gentle bedtime story drifts softly into the calm and silvered dark, and where together, very slowly, we begin our long and peaceful journey among comets, those ancient wandering travelers of the solar system, often called dirty snowballs because they are made of ice, dust, rock, and frozen gases resting together in a cold and delicate balance, waiting in the deep stillness beyond the bright inner worlds for their quiet turn around the sun. And before we follow one of them into the velvet dark, let this be your time to settle in, to loosen your shoulders, to soften your jaw, to let your hands rest wherever they have naturally fallen, and to allow this sleep story to become a slow lantern beside your thoughts, dim enough not to wake the busy mind, but warm enough to guide you into rest, because this is a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep. A nighttime story wrapped in calming narration and gentle bedtime wonder. And as you listen, you may imagine that the room around you is growing quieter with every breath, the edges of the day dissolving like mist, the tasks, the names, the unfinished little things fading into a distance so soft that they no longer ask anything of you. And now, without hurry, breathe in as though you are drawing in cool starlight, and breathe out as though you are laying down a small and invisible burden. And once more breathe in, slow and easy, and breathe out, longer this time, because space itself teaches an old and patient lesson that not everything must happen at once, that some of the most beautiful things take ages to arrive. And comets know this better than almost anything, for many of them spend years, decades, centuries, and even thousands of years in darkness before returning in a long, graceful curve toward the sun, carrying within them some of the oldest material left from the birth of the solar system, little time capsules from more than 4.5 billion years ago, formed when dust and ice gathered together in the cold outer regions around the young sun. And so tonight, as your breathing becomes slow and steady, you may picture one peaceful comet far away, not blazing, not racing, only drifting with immense patience through the great hush beyond the planets, its surface dark in places, powdery in others, touched by ancient frost. And perhaps this is the first relaxing fact to carry with you toward deep sleep. A comet is not usually bright because it is on fire, but because sunlight warms its frozen body and releases gas and dust into space, creating a glowing cloud called a coma, and often the long tails that make it look like a celestial brushstroke painted across the night. And those tails are even gentler than they appear, because one tail is made mostly of dust pushed by sunlight, while another, often straighter one, is made of ionized gas guided by the solar wind, so that a comet's shining form is really a quiet conversation between sunlight, particles, and ancient ice. And now, the second calming fact may settle beside the first. A comet's tail does not trail behind it like the wake of a boat because of speed alone, but generally points away from the sun, as if the star at the center of our system is breathing softly against it, shaping its veil of light wherever it goes. And the third fact drifts in just as softly, that many comets come from two distant reservoirs, the Kuiper belt beyond Neptune, where shorter period comets reside, and the vast spherical Oort Cloud. Much farther still, a remote shell of icy bodies surrounding the solar system in unimaginable quiet, and it is comforting somehow to think that even at the farthest edges of our cosmic home, there are patient objects waiting in the dark, untroubled by clocks, deadlines, or noise. And as we float nearer in imagination to our chosen comet, keeping a respectful and dreamy distance, you might notice that it is much smaller than the splendid tale suggests, because the solid core, called the nucleus, may only be a few kilometers across, modest and uneven, yet able, when warmed, to surround itself with a haze much larger than a planet. And that gentle mismatch between the small and the vast feels like a secret suitable for sleep. A reminder that quiet things can create beautiful presences, that stillness can bloom outward, and perhaps that is why a comet belongs so naturally inside a gentle bedtime tale, because it does not demand attention with noise. It earns wonder through patience, through return, through the simple act of holding ancient cold, until the sun coaxes from it a temporary halo. And there is another soothing fact here as well, that scientists study comets because these icy visitors may preserve clues about the early ingredients of the solar system, including water and organic compounds. And while they do not tell us everything, they offer whispers from the era when planets were still forming, as though the universe had left a few old letters sealed in frost for later generations to open carefully. And now, you do not need to open them all tonight. You do not need to remember every term, every distance, every detail, because this bedtime story is not a test. It is a tide, and all you have to do is float, to let the image of the comet move slowly through your mind, a pale traveler with a soft tail unfurling into darkness, a patient body of ice and dust turning sunlight into a visible sigh, while the room around you grows heavier with comfort, and the mind grows lighter with rest. And as this first chapter comes to close, simply remain here in the stillness, following that distant lantern of ice as it continues its old, unhurried path through the calm and star-filled sea of night. Now, as this soothing nighttime story continues, we drift a little closer to the comet, not so close that the silence is disturbed, but near enough to notice how gently imperfect it is, how its little nucleus is not polished like glass or carved like marble, but shaped more like a weathered stone kept for ages in a box of winter. Uneven, dark, porous, and quietly ancient. And this is one of the most relaxing truths about comets, that they are not grand because they are flawless, but because they have endured, because they have remained themselves through immense distances and uncounted seasons of cold, carrying within their icy bodies traces of the early solar system, as if time once folded a few pale pages of beginning into frozen dust and sent them gliding onward in the dark. And as you settle more deeply into this sleep story, letting your breath become slower than thought, imagine the sun still very far ahead, glowing not harshly, but softly, like a golden lamp at the end of a long corridor, and feel how the comet answers that distant light with patience rather than urgency, because a comet does not awaken all at once. It changes gradually, almost shyly, with the outermost frosts beginning to warm and release invisible gases that seep through tiny cracks and hidden pockets. And from this tender release comes the beginning of the coma, that misty envelope of gas and dust that can swell outward until it becomes vastly larger than the small nucleus at its center, so large that something no bigger than a hill or mountain may appear wrapped in a cloud broader than entire worlds. And there is something deeply calming in that, the idea that a modest heart can be surrounded by great softness, that what is small and old and quietly burdened can still wear a halo. And perhaps that thought itself belongs in a gentle bedtime tale, because it asks nothing from you except that you rest with it for a while. And now our comet turns almost imperceptibly, its movement too slow for hurry, too patient for clocks. And another peaceful fact arrives with it, that the beautiful tale people admire from Earth is not a permanent part of a comet at all, but a temporary gift of warmth and sunlight, shaped each time the traveler comes inward, so the long shining veil is less like clothing and more like breath on a cold morning, something revealed only under certain conditions, something delicate and passing. And when the dust tail spreads, it often curves softly, because the tiny grains released from the nucleus continue in slightly different paths, while the ion tail, touched by the charged flow of the solar wind, can stretch more straight and fine into the black, pointing away from the sun as though guided by an invisible current. And even here, in what could be made into a lesson, there is no need for effort tonight, because the facts may simply float past like small lanterns on dark water, and you may keep whichever ones comfort you and let the rest drift on. And as we remain in our serene orbit beside this wandering world of ice, it becomes easy to understand why comets have inspired wonder for so long, not because they are loud, but because they arrive from silence, because they spend most of their existence in remoteness, and then briefly become visible, like thoughts rising in the mind just before sleep, and then dissolving again before morning can name them. And our comet, though old, is not tired, and though cold, it is not empty, because beneath its crust there may be layers of water ice, carbon dioxide ice, carbon monoxide, dust grains, and organic molecules, each resting together in a loose and fragile architecture formed near the dawn of the planets. And scientists cherish such objects because they may preserve clues to the chemistry of early solar history, little archives of cold matter that escaped melting and reworking. And this too can be made restful if you let it, because it means the universe keeps records in quiet ways, not only in bright stars and burning suns, but in dim bodies that travel slowly and remember. And now the room around you may feel heavier with comfort, your limbs less interested in motion, your thoughts less interested in finishing themselves. And this relaxing story can become even softer as you picture the comet crossing a region where sunlight grows just slightly stronger, enough for the coma to brighten into a pale silver haze, enough for the tail to lengthen like silk released from a patient hand. And perhaps from far behind us, the stars look unchanged, calm and steady, while ahead the inner solar system waits in its own slow arrangement. Yet, there is no need to go there quickly, because tonight we are traveling at the pace of drowsiness, at the pace of a drifting feather, at the pace of something that intends not to arrive, but to soothe. And so we remain with the comet in this middle hush, between darkness and radiance, between cold storage and soft display, learning from it the old art of gradual becoming, the way it gives itself to visibility without ever rushing, the way it carries ancient materials without complaint, the way it glows only when touched, and then, later, will fade again into the outer dark without protest. And if your mind has begun to wander, that is perfectly all right, because wandering is what comets do, and perhaps it is also what sleepy thoughts do when they are almost ready to fall asleep, circling gently, brightening briefly, and then moving farther into the tender and protective night, where even science becomes lullaby, and distance becomes comfort, and the long tail of the comet seems, for a quiet moment, like a ribbon tying your wakeful day to the soft approach of deep sleep. As our bedtime story continues, the comet glides onward with the same patient grace it has carried for ages beyond counting. And now, in the hushed and silver distance between the outer dark and the more sunlit reaches of the solar system, we begin to notice that it leaves behind more than beauty, because a comet, in its calm and ancient way, sows a long garden of dust through space, a thin and delicate trail of particles that can linger along its orbit like a memory that does not quite fade. And this is one of the loveliest and most soothing facts to carry into sleep, that even after the bright tail softens and the moment of display passes, a comet's path is still gently marked by the grains it released under sunlight, tiny fragments of dust set loose from ice, each one drifting onward in quiet obedience to gravity and motion. And sometimes, when Earth later crosses one of these dusty pathways, those small grains meet our atmosphere and become meteor showers, brief falling lights that are not really stars falling at all, but tiny leftovers from ancient comet visits, turning into soft streaks of fire high above the sleeping world. And there is something deeply tender in that, the thought that a peaceful traveler can pass unseen for years and still leave behind a night of beauty for someone else. And perhaps this is why the mind grows calmer here, because the comet does not hurry to be understood. It simply continues and lets its quiet work unfold slowly over time. And now we drift beside it as the coma breathes outward, thin and luminous, and the dark nucleus beneath it turns with such slowness that it seems less like rotation and more like a long thought unfolding. And scientists have found that comet nuclei are often darker than many people imagine, not bright white snowballs, but dusky bodies coated in complex material and dust, reflecting only a small portion of the sunlight that reaches them. And this makes their glow even more comforting, because the brightness is not from a polished surface pretending perfection, but from release, from warming, from the simple and natural response of frozen matter meeting light after a long season of cold. And maybe that is a lesson soft enough for a nighttime story, that not everything radiant begins radiant, that some things glow only when conditions become gentle enough. And as you rest more deeply now, perhaps with your thoughts growing slower and farther apart. Imagine this comet as a patient archivist from the first age of the solar system, carrying the chemistry of those early times in its ice and dust. And while it travels, it tells no loud tale, only a drifting one, a story of water ice, carbon compounds, trapped gases, ancient collisions, distant reservoirs, and immense cycles that unfold so slowly they make human hours feel like little ripples on a still pond. And somewhere, far beyond the warm inner planets, lie the great homes from which many comets come, the flatter Kuiper belt, and the far more distant Oort Cloud, that immense and almost unimaginable sphere of icy bodies thought to surround the solar system at a staggering distance. And it is restful to think of such remoteness not as emptiness, but as storage, as a quiet attic of the cosmos where old objects wait in darkness until some gentle gravitational nudge begins their descent inward. And our comet may have known such silence for longer than memory, longer than language, longer than any map drawn by human hands. And still it comes with no drama, only a tail that lengthens like pale silk, a halo that softens its edges, and a body that keeps turning beneath the sun's steady invitation. And as we follow it, this relaxing story grows even more serene, because the farther we travel with it, the less important it seems to measure anything in sharp terms, and the more natural it feels to experience space as the comet does, in seasons of cold, in long returns, in bright intervals that are temporary and beautiful without needing to last. And this too can help you fall asleep, because sleep is also a kind of return, a trusted orbit, a soft departure from brightness into the deeper and more healing dark. And here another calming fact arrives like a whisper, that each close pass by the sun slowly changes a comet, carrying away some of its ice and dust, reshaping its surface, opening vents, altering its texture, so that every orbit is both a continuation and a gentle revision. And rather than making the comet seem fragile in a troubling way, this makes it feel more companionable, because it is not fixed forever. It is softened by experience, marked by each passage, made into itself by repetition and change, much as a river shapes stone without noise. And now the stars around us seem almost to stand still, while the comet's tail continues to stream away from the sun in patient obedience to light and solar wind. And if your thoughts wander, let them wander with it, because wandering is welcome here, drifting is welcome here, and drowsiness is welcome here. And the old cosmic traveler seems to understand that the most lasting things are not always the loudest or the fastest, but the ones that keep returning with quiet gifts, a haze, a dust trail, a meteor shower yet to come, a reminder that even in the cold mechanics of orbital motion, there can be tenderness. And so this gentle bedtime passage carries you onward through dark velvet space, past the invisible pathways where future meteors sleep in dust form, past the little rotating heart of the comet itself, toward a softer interior silence where facts become comfort, comfort becomes stillness, and stillness opens very gradually into deep sleep. And so, as this gentle bedtime story drifts onward through the cool, and velvety hush of space, we continue beside our patient comet, following the long and tender path it has traced for ages. And now we begin to notice something especially soothing about its journey, because the comet is not only traveling through the solar system, it is quietly preparing little future moments of wonder, releasing dust so fine and light that it lingers along the orbit like a faint ribbon laid carefully in the dark. And these tiny grains, almost weightless in feeling when imagined from here, become part of one of the most peaceful stories in astronomy. Because when a planet like Earth later moves through that lingering trail, the dust can enter the atmosphere and glow as meteors, which means that some of the falling stars people watch from gardens, rooftops, and dark sleeping hillsides are really soft remnants of old comet passages, little signals from a traveler that has already gone by. And there is something deeply restful in knowing that beauty can arrive late, that a comet may pass long before its dust becomes a shower of light for someone else. And so, in this relaxing story, you may imagine the comet as a slow gardener of the night, planting almost invisible seeds of brightness that will bloom later in another sky. And now, the coma around it seems fuller than before, not dense, not stormy, but like a pale breath widening in the cold. And within that, calm cloud sunlight works patiently on frozen material, warming the outer layers enough for hidden gases to escape through cracks and pockets, so that small jets may sometimes rise from the surface and drift away into space. Gentle fountains made not of water in the ordinary sense, but of vapor and dust lifted from ancient ice. And even these quiet jets can, over great stretches of time, nudge and shape the comet's rotation, reminding us that very small releases can alter the motion of very old things, which feels like a thought made perfectly for a nighttime story, because sleep too is often entered by little softenings rather than one grand change. A slower breath, a heavier arm, a thought that lets go of its own edges. And our comet, dark-hearted and haloed, continues inward with no sign of strain, accepting the sun's distant warmth, letting its tails stream away in long and delicate obedience. And perhaps the most comforting fact of all is that a comet does not keep everything forever, because with each return, it gives a little of itself to space, dust to the trail, gas to the coma, light to the eye of whoever may one day look up. And in doing so, it changes gradually, becoming rougher in some places, smoother in others, more opened, more weathered, more itself through every passing orbit. And this slow giving away does not feel sad here, only natural, like autumn leaves returning to the ground, or a long exhale entering a quiet room. And as we float on, the scale of the journey grows softer in the mind, because what is a single night to a comet that may take decades or centuries to complete one circuit? And yet, that is another calming wonder, that these ancient wanderers move on rhythms so slow they seem to belong to a deeper clock than ours, one made of gravity, cold, sunlight, and immense patience. And if you listen with the sleepy part of your imagination, you can almost feel that larger rhythm settling around you now, making your own thoughts less hurried, less bright, less urgent. And in that slower rhythm, there is room for one more quiet truth, that some comets return again and again on predictable paths, becoming familiar visitors, while others come from such remote distances that their arrivals are rare, beyond ordinary memory, as if they were messages posted at the beginning of time and delivered only after civilizations have risen and slept and risen again. And still, however often they return, they do not arrive in noise, but in silence first, then a haze, then a tail, then a trail. And this gradual unveiling feels so kind to the resting mind, because nothing in it demands alarm. Everything in it invites surrender. And now, perhaps the stars around us appear softer than before, not because they have dimmed, but because your thoughts have begun to dim in the best possible way, becoming less like sharp points and more like distant lamps seen through mist, while the comet beside us seems almost to hum without sound, carrying its store of old ice and mineral dust, carrying molecules that remember the early solar system, carrying the peaceful dignity of an object that has no need to hurry into brilliance, because it knows that even a brief, bright arc across the heavens is enough. And here, in the calm middle of its passage, the comet teaches the old lesson once more, that what is gentle may also be enduring, that what is cold may also be luminous, that what travels alone may still leave gifts behind. And as this sleep story lowers its voice even further, becoming more like a whisper than a telling, you may simply drift with that idea, following the long dust path where meteor showers are still sleeping, following the silver veil that sunlight has drawn from ancient frost, following the quiet nucleus at the center of it all, and letting this calming narration carry you closer to deep sleep, where the mind no longer needs to hold every fact. Only the feeling of the comet moving slowly onward through the dark, serene, immense, and perfectly untroubled night. Now the comet glides a little nearer to the heart of the solar system, and this gentle bedtime story follows beside it in a hush so complete that even motion feels like a kind of rest. And as the sun grows warmer, though still soft, and far enough ahead to seem more like a lantern than a blaze, the old nucleus answers with another quiet unfolding, letting more frozen breath escape from its ancient surface, so that the coma grows fuller around it, pale and tender, and almost moon-like in its softness. And the tails, too, lengthen with a serene certainty, as if the comet were slowly combing light through the darkness, drawing out a silver veil that does not rush, does not tremble, does not ask to be admired, but simply exists in the patient language of space. And for the sleepy mind, this may be one of the most calming images of all, that something so small can travel so far and still remain so gentle, still carry such a soft appearance, still move through the black velvet of the cosmos without breaking the peace that surrounds it. And as your breathing deepens and the room around you grows dimmer in feeling, if not in fact, imagine that the comet's long tail is not only a stream of dust and gas, but also a ribbon of old memory, a drifting record of warmth meeting frost, of sunlight touching materials that have spent ages hidden in cold storage. And perhaps that is why comets feel so fitting for a relaxing story, because they remind us that awakening need not be sudden, that change can happen with grace, and that even a body shaped by ice, shadow, and time can answer light without losing its calm. And now our traveler turns so slowly that you can almost forget it is turning at all. Yet, from certain quiet places on its uneven surface, gas escapes in delicate plumes, and each plume is like a whispered release, a private exhale from beneath the crust. And over long periods, those tiny outflows can influence the comet's spin, so that even a subtle breath can reshape a long journey. And maybe that thought belongs beside your pillow tonight, because rest also comes by subtle degrees, by tiny softenings that add up to surrender, by moments so small they seem to vanish as they happen, and still they guide you inward, deeper into the slow and steady comfort of this nighttime story, where the stars above and around us remain calm and distant, not piercing but velvety, not cold in a lonely way, but cool in a soothing way, like a window left slightly open in a quiet house. And as we drift with the comet, we can imagine the early solar system from which it came, not as a place of noise tonight, but as a cradle of dust and ice turning gently around a young sun, where the first ingredients of worlds gathered in slow spirals and patient collisions, while some smaller icy bodies remained farther out, preserved in darkness, waiting for ages before beginning these long inward arcs. And our comet is one such preserved traveler, a fragment from beginning times, a keeper of ancient chemistry, a soft witness to epochs far older than memory, and yet here it is now, close enough to sunlight to become visible, close enough to bloom into a glowing haze, close enough to offer the sleeping imagination a shape to follow. And there is comfort in following something that already knows its path, something that has no need for maps or doubts or explanations, because gravity has been guiding it for ages. And tonight, you may simply let that certainty carry you to, not toward some task or destination, but toward stillness, toward ease, toward the quiet inward curve that leads you to fall asleep. And if the mind reaches for one more fact before letting go, let it be this gentle one, that a comet's most beautiful display is often temporary, a passing arrangement of sunlight, released gas, and drifting dust. And yet temporary things are not lesser for being brief. They are often more tender, more precious, more soothing, because they do not insist on permanence. They only ask to be noticed softly while they are here. And so the comet teaches again, without any need for words, that beauty may pass and still be complete, that brightness may fade and still be enough. And as we move with it through the slowly brightening depths, the tail extends farther behind, or rather away from the sun, and the dust within it spreads in a graceful curve, while the finer ions stream reaches straighter into space, two forms of softness shaped by two different influences, and still both belong to the same quiet traveler, the same ancient nucleus wrapped in mist, the same patient object that has crossed unimaginable distances to arrive at this serene hour beneath the inner dawn. And perhaps, by now, your thoughts are beginning to imitate the comet itself, releasing their sharper edges, letting go of what they no longer need to carry, growing more diffuse, more dreamlike, more willing to drift. And this is good. This is exactly where a sleep story becomes more like a tide than a tale, where calming narration becomes almost indistinguishable from breathing, where the scientific wonder remains, but takes on the softness of a lullaby. And so, we stay here for a while, longer beside the comet's silver veil, floating in silence, watching its ancient body offer one more slow exhale to the sun, watching the darkness hold it tenderly from all sides, and letting that image settle over you like a blanket of cool starlight, gentle enough for deep sleep, wide enough for every restless thought to dissolve into the quiet, untroubled night. Now, as this serene sleep story continues to drift through the tender dark, our comet follows the quiet curve of its sunlit return, moving not with any sense of hurry, but with the same old patience that has carried it through ages of cold and silence. And here in the softer reaches nearer the sun, though still surrounded by vastness, and still held in the immense calm of space. Its ancient body seems to loosen a little more of its frozen memory into the black, as if warmth were not an alarm, but an invitation. And from the uneven surface of the nucleus, where shadowed hollows rest beside dimly lit ridges of ice and dust, more vapor slips free in delicate releases, lifting grains with it, widening the coma, and extending the long, pale tails until the comet seems less like a single object and more like a small, still heart wrapped in layers of drifting light. And perhaps this is one of the most comforting things about comets, that their beauty is not separate from their nature, but rises gently out of it, out of sunlight meeting frost, out of time meeting motion, out of ancient materials answering the nearness of a star in the most graceful way they can. And as you listen to this bedtime story, you may imagine yourself floating beside that silvered haze, far enough from the nucleus to feel no sharpness and no danger, close enough only to notice how the tail fans outward like soft silk in a current no hand can touch, and how the darkness around it does not feel empty at all, but spacious, protective, and kind, like a wide room where every sound has gone to sleep before you. And with each slow breath you take, the comet's journey may begin to resemble your own descent toward rest, because the closer it comes to the sun, the more it lets go, and the closer you come to sleep, the more your thoughts may also release what they were carrying, the little unfinished things, the bright fragments of the day, the names and errands and half-formed questions, all of them loosening gently and trailing away like dust into a calm and forgiving night. And here another soothing fact settles softly beside us, that a comet can appear wonderfully large in the sky because its coma and tail spread so broadly, even though the solid nucleus at its center may remain comparatively small, which makes the whole sight feel like a quiet lesson in tenderness, a reminder that what surrounds us, what softens us, what gives us our visible glow, is not always hardness or weight, but often the light, the breath, the release. And so our comet continues, not trying to shine, only shining because it has entered a region where shining becomes possible. And that is such a peaceful thought for a nighttime story, because rest too often comes not by force, but by conditions becoming gentle enough, the room dim enough, the body quiet enough, the mind safe enough to loosen its hold. And now the sun, still at a respectful distance in our dreamlike passage, seems to lay a gold edge along the comet's coma, while the iron tail streams more straight and fine away from the solar wind, and the dust tail drifts in a softer curve, each tail following its own subtle rule, yet both belonging to one ancient traveler whose journey began long before any human sleep. And perhaps, if you picture that old path now stretched behind the comet through the solar system like a thread drawn through black velvet, you can feel the calm scale of it, the way these orbits take years or decades, sometimes longer, the way a single return is patient beyond ordinary living. And in that patience, there is relief, because nothing here demands a quick conclusion. Nothing insists on urgency. Nothing asks you to be more awake than you already are, and instead, this relaxing story offers only the slow companionship of a cosmic wanderer giving itself to sunlight in careful measure. And if we drift even a little nearer in imagination, we can almost sense the nucleus turning, not dramatically, only enough to let one quiet region after another face the warmth, each rotation bringing a new hidden patch of ice into light, each turning moment releasing another faint veil into the coma, until the whole comet feels like a breathing object, not alive in the human sense, but alive in rhythm, alive in response, alive in the tender exchange between matter and star. And by now, the scene has grown so calm that even the scientific wonder becomes soft-edged, as if astronomy itself had lowered its voice for the sake of sleep, speaking no longer in sharp diagrams, but in images of drifting particles, old ice, silent distances, and long returns. And perhaps that is why comets belong so naturally inside calming narration, because they hold together fact and feeling, physics and poetry, motion and stillness. And as the hour deepens and your own thoughts become more distant, you may simply remain here beside the comet's widening glow, letting its ancient orbit carry the story onward, letting its dust and gas write pale lines into the dark, letting its old frozen heart remind you that even after long cold, there can be gentle release, and that release can be beautiful. And beautiful things do not need to be loud, and loud things are not welcome here, because this is a gentle bedtime passage meant to help you fall asleep, to lead you toward deep sleep, and to leave you floating in the quiet certainty that somewhere in the vast and star-filled hush, a comet is still curving onward, calm as breath, soft as memory, and peaceful enough to carry your waking mind into dreams. And now, as this slow and soothing bedtime story continues through the peaceful architecture of the solar system, our ancient comet approaches the gentlest part of its inward arc, the quiet region where sunlight reaches it more fully, and where its long-hidden frosts answer with a little more breath, a little more silver, a little more softness unfolding into the dark. And even here, at this brighter stage of the journey, nothing feels hurried or sharp, because the comet remains what it has always been, a patient gathering of ice, dust, stone, and memory, moving through space with the serene dignity of something that has never needed applause in order to be beautiful. And if you imagine it now, glowing within its pale and widening coma, with its tails drawn out behind it, or rather away from the sun. Like ribbons of delicate mist, you may notice that the whole scene seems to breathe in its own quiet rhythm. A rhythm old enough to make every earthly clock feel small and far away. And this may be one of the most calming facts of all, that a comet can spend so much of its existence in cold obscurity and still become luminous without noise when the conditions are right, simply by warming, simply by releasing, simply by allowing the sun to coax a halo from the ancient materials stored within it. Since the early solar system first formed from swirling gas and dust more than 4.5 billion years ago, and as this sleep story carries you deeper into stillness, you may picture the nucleus turning slowly beneath that haze, its surface marked by old cracks, dusty plains, fragile crusts, and quiet pockets of volatile ice, each region waiting its turn to face the warmth. And when it does, gas seeps outward in tender plumes, lifting dust grains into the coma and feeding the long tails that give the comet its graceful appearance. And none of this is dramatic here, none of it is fierce, because tonight even physics arrives like a lullaby, with sunlight as the gentle hand, sublimation as the soft exhale, and the tail as the visible trace of something ancient letting go in peace. And perhaps that image can help you fall asleep, because the mind, too, sometimes needs a soft warming before it can release the little particles of the day, the fragments of thought, the unfinished lists, the mild concerns that float around the edges of awareness. And so, as the comet nears this closest and brightest portion of its path, you may let your own thoughts drift outward and away from you, like dust from a patient nucleus no longer held tightly, no longer needing to remain in orbit around your waking mind. And there is another very gentle wonder here, that while the comet may look grand in its glowing display, the solid body at the center is still only modest in size compared with the vast veil surrounding it, which means that much of what we perceive as its beauty comes from what it has released into space. And that makes it feel almost tender, almost instructive, as if the cosmos were whispering that softness can enlarge us, that letting go can create radiance, that what appears most expansive is sometimes not the hard core of a thing, but the faint and luminous cloud that forms around it when light and time are allowed to do their work. And now, the sun ahead does not blaze in any harsh way, not in this relaxing story, but shines like a warm and distant hearth at the center of an enormous dark house. And around that hearth, the planets continue their own calm motions, while our comet sweeps through on its long returning path, carrying traces of primordial chemistry, carrying perhaps some of the oldest preserved ingredients of planetary history, carrying the quiet testimony that the solar system still keeps some of its first materials tucked away in cold traveling archives. And if your thoughts have begun to blur at the edges, that is good, because this is where a nighttime story becomes less about following every sentence and more about resting inside the flow of them, letting phrases pass like faint stars behind a veil, hearing only enough to remain comforted, hearing only enough to feel accompanied through the dark. And now, the comet's dust tail broadens in a soft curve, while the ion tail extends more straight and fine, each responding to a different influence, one more shaped by sunlight and orbital motion, the other by the invisible breath of the solar wind. And together, they create a double gesture of elegance, as if the comet were painting two quiet lines into the universe, one gentle and sweeping, one delicate and direct, and both dissolving slowly into black velvet space. And it is easy here to forget the boundary between science and dream, because the facts themselves are already so tranquil, already so patient, already so full of distance, silence, and return. And perhaps that is why comets are such perfect companions for calming narration, because they do not interrupt the night, they deepen it. They do not break the silence, they adorn it. And as our traveler rounds this softly brightened part of its course, there is no sense of climax, only continuation, only the old orbit carrying on, only the old nucleus turning, only the old materials loosening into light. And then, eventually, preparing to fade again, when the comet travels outward once more toward the cold reservoirs of space. And there is something deeply restful in that promise of return, in the knowledge that brightness is followed by dimness, dimness by distance, distance by quiet, and quiet by rest. So now let the comet keep moving for you. Let the tails stream for you. Let the sun remain a warm and steady lamp in the far cosmic room. And let this gentle bedtime passage carry you farther into deep sleep, where all journeys become soft, all questions become light, and all ancient travelers pass silently across the inward sky of dreams, very gently now, as this drifting sleep story continues beyond the comet's closest and brightest curve around the sun. We begin to follow it into the next soft chapter of its ancient journey, the part where nothing ends abruptly, where no light is suddenly extinguished, but where everything slowly, tenderly, almost gratefully begins to loosen and thin, as if the comet itself were exhaling after a long silver breath. And this is such a peaceful stage to witness, because the old traveler does not leave the inner solar system in haste. It glides away with the same patience that brought it here, carrying its halo a little longer, stretching its tails a little farther, and letting the warmth of the sun fade by degrees rather than all at once. And as you rest here in this bedtime story, perhaps with your own thoughts now dimmer than before, and your body feeling heavier in the best possible way, you may imagine the comet turning in silence, its dark nucleus still rough and ancient beneath the coma, still releasing a little gas from places that were recently warmed, still letting fine dust drift outward into space, but less than before, a little less with each passing interval, until its brightness becomes softer, more delicate, more like memory than display. And perhaps that is one of the loveliest facts about comets, that even their fading is beautiful, because when a comet moves away from the sun, the energy reaching its surface declines, the sublimation slows, the coma begins to shrink, and the dramatic tails that seemed so broad and luminous near the inward curve grow fainter in a manner so gradual that it feels almost like twilight settling over a familiar garden. And this gentle lessening belongs perfectly inside a nighttime story, because sleep itself often arrives that way, not not as a door slamming shut, but as brightness slowly withdrawing from the edges of awareness, as thoughts becoming less solid, less separate, more willing to drift together into one soft and untroubled dark. And now, as we follow the comet outward, another calm truth comes with it, that these returning bodies are shaped not only by their beginnings, but by every passage they survive, every warming, every release, every long retreat back into colder reaches. So the comet before us is not exactly the same traveler it was on the way in, because some of its ices have been spent, some of its dust has been given to the void, some of its surface has been altered by sunlight, and yet it remains beautifully itself, a patient archive of the early solar system, a small ancient body still carrying primordial material from the era when planets were forming. And there is something restful in that balance between change and continuity, because the comet teaches that to be altered is not to be lost, to release is not to disappear, and to grow quieter is not to grow empty. And as the sun becomes more distant behind its retreating path, the dust tail broadens and thins, and the ion tail, once so clearly shaped by the solar wind, becomes subtler to our dreamy gaze, until the whole comet appears less like a bright brushstroke and more like a lantern being carefully shaded, still glowing, but politely, softly, as though it understands the hour has become late. And the mind, listening to this relaxing story, is ready for even dimmer wonders. And so we stay with it in this hushed afterglow, watching the coma draw inward around the nucleus, watching the once generous veil become finer and calmer, and noticing that the darkness around us is not an absence, but a shelter, a place where old travelers return after their brief season of shining. And maybe this thought can help you fall asleep, that the comet does not mourn its dimming, because dimming is part of its rhythm, just as waking and sleeping are part of yours. And after brightness comes softness, and after softness comes distance, and after distance comes the deep, cold peace of the outer solar system, where objects wait in silence, so complete that even time seems to settle like frost. And it is there, eventually, that our comet will continue on its long ellipse, carrying whatever remains of this passage into farther dark, perhaps to return again after years or centuries, perhaps to be seen by future eyes beneath future nights. And until then, it will keep the old secret of the cosmos, that not everything meaningful must remain near the light, that some of the most enduring stories are written in retreat, in patience, in quiet return. And now the stars around us seem wider apart, or perhaps your thoughts do, and that is all right, because this gentle bedtime current is meant to carry you beyond the need to follow every detail, beyond the need to hold every fact in place, and into a calmer floating where only the feeling remains, the image of an ancient comet, dark at its center, soft at its edges, slowly receding from the sun with a dignity so calm it becomes almost like music without sound. And if there is one last soothing idea to cradle as you drift toward deep sleep, let it be this: that the universe allows for slow departures, for fading without fear, for journeys that do not announce themselves loudly, and somewhere out in that vast and velvety stillness, our comet is already growing quieter, already becoming once more a small keeper of ice and dust, already returning to the colder halls of space where silence waits like a blanket, and we, floating nearby in imagination, may simply follow that silence until even the story becomes softer than a whisper, and the whisper becomes sleep. Far from the warm inner brightness now, our ancient traveler continues outward through the calm and widening dark. And this gentle bedtime story follows beside it with the same unhurried breath, as though the whole solar system has lowered its voice for the sake of rest. Because the comet, having rounded the softest curve of sunlight, no longer blooms so fully with vapor and dust, and instead begins the peaceful work of becoming quiet again. And there is something deeply soothing in watching that happen, because a comet does not lose itself when it grows dim. It simply returns to the colder version of its nature, carrying the memory of brightness, the way a shell carries the memory of the sea. And as you listen to this sleep story, perhaps with your thoughts loosening and your body settling more deeply into stillness, imagine the nucleus beneath its thinning coma, dark and irregular, ancient and patient, still turning little by little in the velvet black, while the sun behind it grows smaller in feeling, less like a nearby lamp, and more like a far hearth scene from the end of a long winter hall. And because less warmth now reaches the surface, fewer frozen gases escape, fewer grains are lifted into the surrounding haze, and the silver veil that once spread so generously around the comet begins to gather inward, becoming finer, lighter, and more transparent, until the traveler seems once again like a modest stone of ice and dust wrapped in only the faintest breath. And perhaps this is one of the loveliest truths about comets, that they live in cycles of appearance and retreat, of glow and hush, of sunlight and distance, and all of it belongs to the same long rhythm, which makes them perfect companions for a nighttime story. Because sleep also arrives in rhythms, not as failure, not as disappearance, but as a trusted return to a quieter state. And now, as we drift with the comet farther from the sun, there is room for another soft fact to rest in the mind, that much of a comet's material can remain preserved for astonishing lengths of time in the cold, outer regions of the solar system, protected by distance from the stronger warmth that alters other worlds more quickly. And this is why scientists treasure these travelers, because within them may remain old clues about the ingredients present when the planets were young, as though the earliest chapter of our cosmic home had been tucked away in frozen envelopes and sent on long elliptical journeys through time. And tonight, that idea need not feel academic at all, only comforting, because it means the universe remembers gently, storing some of its oldest secrets not in loud places, but in dim and drifting bodies that keep to the margins until gravity calls them inward again. And our comet, which once wore a broad luminous tail, now trails only a softer remnant of that former display. The dust spread more thinly along its path, the ions stream less insistent to the dreaming eye. And if you picture that fading tail now, you may think of it not as something vanishing, but as something finishing its sentence with grace, leaving behind a little dust in the orbital road, perhaps to become the source of a future meteor shower. When a planet crosses that path, and even in retreat, the comet continues to offer quiet gifts, which is such a tender thought for a relaxing story, because it suggests that departure and generosity can exist together, that a thing may move away and still leave beauty behind. And as the darkness around us deepens into cooler shades, the stars seem steadier and more numerous, not bright in a waking way, but distant in a sleepy way, like tiny lamps seen through half-closed eyes. And there, in their midst, the comet goes on, less adorned now, more reserved, more nearly what it was before the sun called out its hidden vapors. And perhaps you can feel, somewhere within your own slowing thoughts, the kindness of that change, the permission to become simpler, dimmer, quieter, to release the need to shine, to release the need to keep producing light when rest is asking for darkness instead, because this gentle bedtime passage is not leading you toward more effort, only toward surrender. And the comet itself models that beautifully, letting the coma shrink, letting the tails fade, letting cold return without complaint, and beyond us, somewhere farther still than imagination easily reaches, lie the outer reservoirs where countless icy bodies wait in profound stillness. The Kuiper belt spread beyond Neptune, and farther than that the vast, remote cloud of distant objects surrounding the solar system in near-perfect silence. And it is restful to think that our traveler is headed again toward a region where nothing hurries it, where sunlight touches only lightly, where time stretches so wide that centuries can feel like slow breathing. And perhaps by now your own breathing has taken on something of that scale. Not literally vast, of course, but deeper, softer, steadier, less entangled with thought, more willing to carry you toward deep sleep. And if there is any final image to keep for this chapter, let it be this one. The comet moving outward through the tranquil dark, its once bright halo now a pale whisper, its old nucleus turning under a delicate skin of frost, its path curving gently toward colder silence, and we beside it in imagination, asking nothing, chasing nothing, simply floating in calm companionship with an ancient wanderer that knows how to brighten without panic and fade without fear. And in that example, there is a rare comfort, enough to help you fall asleep, enough to let this calming narration become softer than thought, softer than distance, softer even than memory, until the story itself seems to frost over at the edges and settle quietly into the immense, serene, and welcoming night. Now the comet moves farther into the cool and outer quiet, and this gentle sleep story follows it with no hurry at all, as though the dark itself were carrying us in slow and careful hands. And here, away from the brighter nearness of the sun, the traveler becomes more reserved again, more inward, more wrapped in its own ancient stillness. And perhaps that is why this part of the journey feels so deeply peaceful, because the comet is no longer opening into display, no longer drawing wide, bright veils through space, but returning, almost gratefully, to a simpler form, a dark little nucleus of ice and dust turning in the immense hush with only the faintest suggestion of a surrounding breath. And as you listen to this bedtime story, you may imagine the great shape of its orbit, not as a sharp line, but as a long and elegant ellipse stretched through the solar system like a ribbon drawn slowly through black velvet. So long that years and decades can gather inside it like dew on quiet grass. And this is one of the softest scientific wonders of all, that a comet may spend only a brief portion of its journey near enough to the sun to glow, while most of its existence unfolds in dimmer regions, where cold keeps its oldest materials sleeping under the surface. And that thought can be restful in itself, because it reminds us that not every meaningful thing must always be visible, that much of what matters may remain hidden, preserved, and calm for long stretches of time. And our comet seems to know this perfectly, for it does not resist the fading of its tail or the shrinking of its coma. It simply goes on, carrying the memory of brightness without clinging to it. And if your own thoughts have begun to soften around the edges now, perhaps becoming less like separate ideas and more like slow drifting clouds, you may let them follow the example of the comet, releasing what they no longer need to hold, letting the day fall away in fine, invisible grains, until all that remains is this steady outward, gliding through the quiet architecture of the night. And here another soothing fact settles in beside us, that the surface of a comet can become coated with darker dust after repeated passages closer to the sun, as if the traveler wears a soft and weathered mantle formed from its own long history. And rather than making it seem worn in any sad way, that weathering makes it feel companionable, as though time has been touching it gently for ages, leaving marks that are neither wounds nor warnings, only signs of endurance. And as the sun grows smaller behind us, its influence weakens little by little, so that frozen gases rest more peacefully beneath the crust, and fewer of them escape into space. And because of that, the comet becomes less haloed, less adorned, more nearly the quiet archive it has always been, a keeper of old ingredients from the early solar system, a small and wandering storehouse of ice, dust, and ancient compounds. And tonight, these facts are not here to sharpen the mind, but to soothe it, to become part of the calming narration that leads you downward into rest, because there is something tender about a body that can travel through such distances and still remain intact enough to return, still remain itself enough to carry fragments of beginning through the long Middle Ages of space. And now, the stars around the comet appear almost still, not because nothing moves, but because everything moves with such dignity and patience that motion becomes another form of quiet. And this is why the outer journey feels so fitted to a nighttime story, because in the farther dark, there is no pressure to arrive, no demand to glow, no command to perform, only the long confidence of orbit, the old certainty of gravity, and the silence that waits without asking anything from the traveler or from you. And perhaps your breathing has become slower now, deeper now, softer now. And in that soft breathing, there is room for one more image, the comet crossing remote distances, where sunlight falls more lightly over its rough contours, where ridges and hollows cool again into frost, where old vents grow quiet, and where the last traces of its brighter season settle into memory. And if somewhere ahead lie the distant reaches, where other icy bodies wait in cold patience, Then our traveler is moving back toward a kind of family of silence, toward those outer halls where the solar system keeps its oldest, dimmest little wanderers. And there is comfort in that return, because the comet is not being lost to darkness. It is being welcomed by it, folded back into the colder chapters of its long biography. And all the while it teaches the same gentle lesson again and again. That retreat can be peaceful, that dimness can be kind, that there is no failure in becoming quiet. And so this relaxing story lowers its voice even more, until the comet is only a small turning presence ahead of us, dark at the center, faintly frosted at the edges, moving through deep space with a grace so complete it hardly seems like movement at all. And if you are ready now to fall asleep, to let the words become more distant than the stars, then simply rest here with the old traveler, following its slow ellipse beneath the sleeping heavens, allowing every unfinished thought to cool into silence, allowing every bright concern to fade like a tale in retreat, and letting the immense and patient dark carry you very gently into deep sleep, farther now from the bright and golden center. Our comet continues into the deepening calm with such softness that this sleep story seems less like a tale and more like a slow and floating breath, because the farther outward we drift with this ancient traveler, the more the solar system begins to feel like a vast and peaceful house at night, with the sun glowing in a distant room behind us, the planets resting along their own quiet paths, and the comet returning to the cooler halls where frost can settle again upon its old and patient surface. And if you imagine it now, turning slowly in the dark, you may notice how little it asks of the universe, how little it asks of you. For it is no longer wearing the fuller silver veil it carried nearer the sun, no longer extending such broad and luminous tails into space, but becoming simpler, dimmer, gentler, and perhaps more beautiful for that very reason. Because there is a special comfort in things that know how to quiet themselves without fear. And as this bedtime story glides beside the comet, the nucleus appears once more as a modest and ancient body of ice, dust, and stone, rough in shape, dark in places, lightly frosted in others, a preserved remnant from the solar system's earliest age. And though its brighter activity has softened, its old significance has not, because even in this calmer phase, it remains what it has always been, a keeper of deep time, a small wandering archive carrying the ingredients and textures of beginnings through long elliptical years. And this can become a soothing thought to rest inside tonight, that some things do not need to speak loudly to be important, and some travelers do not need to shine brightly to be full of meaning. And now the space around us feels wider still, cooler and more delicate, as if every star has stepped back a little to make room for silence, and the comet moves through that silence with a serene certainty, guided by gravity, shaped by memory, and accompanied only by the faintest remnant of the halo that once surrounded it. And perhaps this is why comets belong so naturally in a nighttime story, because they understand cycles without resisting them. They brighten when warmth arrives. They soften when warmth departs, and through both changes, they remain devoted to their path. And if your thoughts have become light enough by now, you may let them drift like the last fine grains of dust trailing behind the comet, slowly spreading into the invisible road of its orbit, where one day, perhaps far in the future, another world may cross that path and watch a meteor shower bloom from what this quiet traveler gently left behind. And there is something deeply tender in that idea, that even after the grander part of its display has ended, the comet continues to offer beauty indirectly, quietly, almost anonymously, as though the universe itself preferred gifts that arrive later and softly. And now, the farther dark gathers around us like velvet folded over velvet, and the old traveler continues on, its surface cooling more deeply, its hidden gases settling into greater stillness, its turning motion so unhurried that it becomes almost meditative to watch. And if you wish, you can imagine that each slow rotation is like another turn of a page in a book too calm to ever truly end. A book written in frost and orbit and star-cold patience, where every chapter returns to silence without sadness. And perhaps the gentlest lesson of all is here, in this outward drifting, that nothing has been lost simply because the brightness has faded, because the comet has not ceased to be wondrous. It has only entered another mode of being, one quieter and more inward. And maybe that is what sleep asks of us too, not to disappear, not to become less real, but simply to grow quieter, to fold the mind inward, to let the brighter parts dim and the deeper parts take over, until rest feels not like absence, but like return. And so this relaxing story keeps its voice low and steady, following the comet past remote distances, where the sunlight falls only gently on its weathered ridges, where the once active vents are now mostly still, where the faint memory of a tale has dissolved into the greater dark, and where the cold itself feels almost protective, preserving what remains beneath the surface for future passages yet to come. And somewhere beyond, in those far and dim domains, where countless icy bodies wait in the patient outskirts of the solar system, our traveler seems already to belong, as if the farther it goes, the more the dark recognizes it and welcomes it back. And if your body is heavy now, if your breathing is deep now, if the words are beginning to blur into a soft current rather than distinct thoughts, then you are exactly where this gentle bedtime journey hoped to bring you, to a place where science becomes lullaby, where cosmic distance becomes comfort, where an ancient comet moving through black and silent space can help you fall asleep by showing that even the longest journeys can be peaceful, even the coldest places can be serene, and even the quietest travelers can carry enough wonder to guide the mind gently, patiently, and almost invisibly toward deep sleep. And so our ancient traveler continues outward, farther from the warm middle of the solar system, and deeper into the calm blue-black hush, where light becomes gentler, and silence seems to settle on every surface like a fine and patient frost. And this sleep story goes with it, not as a guide and not as a map, but as a soft companion moving at the pace of rest, because there is no reason to hurry now, no sudden turn to make, no bright threshold to cross, only the long and graceful deepening of distance, the old ellipse carrying the comet back toward colder reaches where its silver veils have nearly folded away, and where the nucleus, dark and irregular and ancient, can rest again inside its simpler form. And perhaps this is one of the most comforting moments in the whole journey, because here the comet seems content to be quiet, content to be small against the enormous architecture of stars, content to let go of the brighter display it wore near the sun and return to the old dignity of ice, dust, and time. And as you listen to this bedtime story, you may imagine that the darkness around it is not empty at all, but full of a tender spaciousness, the kind that asks nothing from you, the kind that does not press or demand or rush, the kind that allows a mind to become softer simply by existing within it. And there ahead of us, or perhaps beside us now in the blurred and dreamy geography of sleep, the comet turns little by little, one patient face after another, meeting the faint and distant sunlight. And because that light is weaker here, the hidden gases beneath the surface remain mostly still. The old vents grow quiet, and the once broader halo settles closer to the nucleus, like a shawl being drawn gently around narrow shoulders at the end of a long evening. And there is something deeply soothing in that image, because the comet is not losing its beauty as it grows dim. It is changing the shape of its beauty, exchanging radiance for reserve, display for stillness, brightness for the kind of dark that protects rather than conceals. And maybe that is why it feels so right to follow this traveler as a nighttime story. Because night, too, does not take the world away. It simply lowers the light until gentler details become enough. And now, the path behind the comet stretches out as memory. A path where dust was once released in soft abundance, where sunlight once drew long tails outward into space, where the inner worlds once lay nearer and warmer. And all of that is still part of the journey, even though it has passed. Just as the waking hours are still part of you, even when they have already drifted behind, and yet they no longer need your attention, no longer need your effort, because this is the hour when thoughts can behave like comet dust and spread quietly into the dark until they are no longer heavy enough to hold. And if one last fact-like comfort is welcome as the story continues, perhaps it is simply this: that comets endure by moving through cycles, by approaching and withdrawing, by glowing and then resting. And there is nothing wrong in the resting phase, nothing lesser in the colder chapter, because the return to distance is part of what preserves them, part of what keeps their oldest materials sleeping through ages of dark. And that preservation feels gentle tonight, almost domestic in its calm, as though the outer solar system were a vast and silent house with cool rooms kept ready for ancient guests. And our comet, having finished its brighter visit near the warm central hearth, is now passing back into those quiet rooms where frost can gather and remain undisturbed for years beyond counting. And as we drift with it, your own breathing may seem to match that rhythm now, slower than before, deeper than before, wider somehow, as though the body has remembered an older and calmer pattern than waking life usually allows. And in that slower rhythm, the story does not need to persuade you of anything does not need to explain every distance or name every region, because by now explanation has softened into atmosphere, and atmosphere has softened into lullaby, and the comet itself has become less an object than a feeling, a dark little lantern moving through immeasurable quiet, carrying the memory of sunlight on its worn and frosted surface, while asking for nothing more than the freedom to continue its patient curve through the stars. And perhaps that is the final comfort of this chapter, that the universe makes room for such slow travelers, that it allows them their long silences and their rare bright moments alike, and that somewhere in that permission there is also room for your own mind to rest, to dim without worry, to release the last small brightnesses of the day, and drift into a gentler interior dark where even thoughts no longer need full shape, and even memory can become soft around the edges. And so we remain here for a little while longer beside the comet's faint outline, watching the last suggestion of halo hover around its ancient center, watching the farther dark open before it like a cool and endless meadow of stars, and letting this relaxing story become quieter and quieter until it is barely more than breath, barely more than motion, barely more than the feeling of following something old and peaceful back toward the silent cold, where frost endures, where distance comforts, where the long orbit continues without noise, and where you may gently, easily, almost without noticing, begin to fall asleep into the softest and deepest kind of rest. Now the comet carries us into a region where the sun has become a small and patient ember behind us, and this gentle sleep story grows even quieter in response, as if the words themselves have begun to gather a little frost at their edges, because out here in the farther dark there is less to dazzle and more to soothe, less shining veil and more enduring stillness, and our ancient traveler seems perfectly at home in that balance, moving onward through the calm with a dignity so soft it hardly feels like movement at all, only a slow continuation of silence, only a dark and modest nucleus of ice and dust following its old elliptical path through a corridor of stars that seem half asleep themselves. And perhaps this is one of the most peaceful stages of the journey, because the comet no longer needs to become anything for the light, no longer needs to answer warmth with brightness, no longer needs to lift dust into broad silver banners, and instead it returns to its simplest truth, a preserved remnant from the early solar system, an old keeper of cold materials resting beneath a weathered outer skin, carrying memory not as noise, but as quiet composition. And as this bedtime story continues, you may imagine that every rough curve on the comet's surface is cooling a little more deeply now, every old vent settling into stillness, every patch of ancient frost growing more comfortable in the weaker sunlight, until the whole traveler seems wrapped in an inward hush. And there is something deeply comforting in following an object that does not resist its own quieting, that does not cling to the brighter chapter now behind it, but simply accepts the farther dark as part of the same graceful orbit. And maybe that is why comets belong so naturally inside a nighttime story, because they remind us that retreat can be gentle, that distance can be kind, and that becoming quiet again is not a loss, but a return to a truer and deeper rest. And now, the path ahead feels immense and untroubled, as though space itself has opened a cool, dim hallway lined with sleeping stars, and through that hallway, the comet drifts with patient certainty, while any lingering halo remains only as the faintest breath around the nucleus, a soft suggestion rather than a display, a whisper rather than a song. And if your thoughts are slowing now, if they are becoming less interested in finishing themselves, that is all right, because this relaxing story was always meant to move this way, away from sharpness, away from effort, away from anything that might disturb the mind as it begins to fall asleep. And out here, it becomes easy to imagine the outer solar system not as emptiness, but as preservation, a cool and vast archive where icy wanderers endure through long centuries, where ancient materials remain tucked beneath crust and dust, waiting in silence for futures too distant to trouble the present moment. And our comet, having offered up some of its frosts and fine grains during its sunlit passage, now keeps the rest close, as if drawing a blanket around itself for the long outward night. And perhaps you can feel your own mind doing something similar, gathering inward, letting the brighter concerns of the day trail behind you like dust, spread thin along an invisible path, no longer needing to be held, no longer needing to glow, because rest asks for less, and less can be beautiful. And here in this slow and hushed chapter, there is room for one more tender thought, that the universe does not hurry its oldest travelers. It lets them take their time. It lets them move in long curves and long silences. It lets them fade gradually, return gradually, endure gradually. And there is such comfort in that permission, such softness in the idea that the great dark is spacious enough to hold both the comet's ancient sleep and your own. And as we continue beside this little frost-dark lantern, the stars seem steadier and farther apart. The distance is wider, the silence kinder, and the comet itself more inward than ever, turning in such patient increments that each rotation feels like the closing of another quiet eyelid, another dimming of another waking thought. And perhaps this is where the calming narration becomes almost indistinguishable from the drift of space itself, because there is no need now to explain or measure, only to remain here in the cool corridor beyond the last warm glow, where the nucleus continues along its old route beneath a light so gentle it can barely wake the frost, and where the long memory of the sun lingers only as a soft trace on its surface. And the farther it goes, the more it seems to enter a region made specially for gentle bedtime, a region of low light and patient distance and quiet endurance, where nothing sudden happens, where nothing insists, where even time seems to settle into slower breathing. And so, if sleep is near for you now, let it come without effort. Let it come like the comet's own return to the cold, gradual and natural and perfectly unafraid. Let the room around you blur at the edges. Let the story become less a line of words and more a dark and soothing current, and let this old traveler keep moving softly in your mind until it becomes only a tiny frosted presence beneath the sleeping stars, and then only a feeling of stillness, and then only the deep and velvety quiet into which all bright things gently fade, far now from the brighter middle of the solar system, where the sun has softened into a distant and patient ember. Our old comet continues its long outward drift through a darkness so calm that even time seems to move more slowly here, and this gentle sleep story follows beside it without hurry, without effort, without asking anything of you except that you keep resting and let the quiet widen, because out here the traveler no longer wears the broad, luminous veil it carried nearer the warmth, and instead it returns to a simpler beauty, the beauty of a small, ancient body of ice, dust, and stone moving through enormous silence with the kind of grace that does not need to be seen in order to be complete. And as you listen, perhaps with your thoughts already dimming into softer shapes, you may imagine the comet's rough nucleus turning little by little in the cold, its surface dark in some places, faintly frosted in others, like an old winter lantern whose light has gone inward rather than out. And there is something deeply comforting in that image, because the comet is not diminished by its quiet. It is simply at home in it. And perhaps this is one of the loveliest things a wandering object can teach the sleepy mind, that not every chapter must be bright, not every moment must be expressive, and not every beautiful thing must announce itself loudly to the night. And so this bedtime story grows gentler still as we travel with it into the farther dark, where any remaining halo has become only the softest breath around the nucleus, so faint that it feels less like a visible cloud and more like a memory of warmth, a memory the comet carries without clinging to it. And now, the path behind us seems very long indeed, stretched across the solar system like a quiet ribbon of remembrance, holding within it the earlier brightening, the delicate tails, the slow release of dust and vapor, the silent turn around the sun, and now the graceful retreat into colder distance. And all of it belongs to the same calm orbit, the same patient cycle, the same ancient life of return and withdrawal, which makes the whole journey feel less like an adventure and more like breathing on a cosmic scale, a long inhale toward light and a long exhale back into dark. And perhaps your own breathing has softened to match it now, deeper and steadier, less connected to thought, more connected to rest. And if so, you may simply let the comet keep going for you, because it knows this route better than any waking mind ever could, and it carries itself through silence with the easy certainty of something shaped by gravity, cold, and immeasurable time. And somewhere in that certainty, there is peace for you too, because there is nothing to solve here, nothing to prepare, nothing to remember by force, only the image of a frost-dark traveler gliding through a region where light is thin and kind, and where the stars seem to rest in their places like tiny lamps left burning in distant rooms of a sleeping house. And if one more soft scientific thought still lingers in the story, let it linger the way frost lingers on a window before dawn, quietly and without pressure. For the comet remains a keeper of old material, a preserved remnant from the early ages of the solar system. And though much of its brighter display has faded behind it, it still carries the calm dignity of deep time, of endurance, of having traveled through cold so long that cold itself feels like a form of shelter rather than emptiness. And maybe that is why this nighttime story feels quieter with every passing chapter, because the farther outward we go, the more the universe seems to reward stillness, and the more natural it becomes to let the mind loosen its edges and drift, to let thoughts spread thin like fine dust along an invisible path, to let each concern become lighter than it was an hour ago, until even the last small brightnesses of the day begin to fade in a gentle and orderly way, just as the comet's old tails faded when the warmth grew distant, and now the traveler seems almost suspended rather than moving, because its motion is so patient, so continuous, so free from urgency that it becomes another kind of stillness. And if you remain beside it in imagination a little longer, you may feel that stillness entering the room around you, softening the air, softening the bed beneath you, softening the small spaces between thoughts, until those spaces become wide enough for sleep to settle there, and the deeper dark ahead does not feel lonely at all, only spacious, only cool, only welcoming in the same way. A quiet winter night can be welcoming when you are safely inside, and there is nothing left to do. And so we continue, slowly and peacefully, with the comet as it returns toward those far reaches where ancient icy wanderers spend long ages in silence, where sunlight arrives only lightly, where frost can remain undisturbed, and where old bodies are allowed to rest between their rare bright visits inward. And perhaps by now, the story itself has become like that. A dim little comet of language moving across the sky of your thoughts, leaving behind only a thin trail of calm, only a soft suggestion of wonder, only enough calming narration to help you fall asleep. And if sleep is very near now, let it come the way the farther dark comes, gradually, tenderly, without edges, until the comet is only a faint shape in the distance, then only a feeling of cool peace, and then only the deep blue silence of the outer reach, wide enough to hold every tired thought, and gentle enough to carry you all the way into deep sleep, deeper now into the farther dark, where the sun has become only a distant pearl of warmth behind us, and the stars seem to rest in their places like quiet thoughts, no longer asking to be finished. Our old comet continues its patient outward drift, and this gentle sleep story continues with it, slower than before, softer than before, as though the words themselves are learning from the traveler how to move without hurry, and how to remain beautiful without brightness. And here in this cool and remote silence, the comet appears almost completely returned to itself. No broad silver tails unfurling now, no wide halo breathing into space, only a small and ancient nucleus of ice, dust, and stone, turning in the deep blue-black hush with such serenity that it seems less like an object in motion and more like a memory held carefully in the palm of the universe. And perhaps that is one of the most restful things about comets, that after all their gentle glowing and all their temporary splendor, they do not resist becoming quiet again. They do not cling to display. They simply allow the cold to gather around them once more, allow the frost to settle, allow the long night of distance to preserve what remains. And as you listen to this bedtime story, you may imagine the comet's uneven surface cooling more deeply with every unhurried hour. The old ridges and hollows, the shadowed plains and dusty crusts, all resting under weaker sunlight, until the whole traveler feels like a soft archive of sleeping ice, carrying deep time in silence, carrying the chemistry of ancient beginnings without needing to explain itself. And in that image, there is so much peace, because not everything meaningful must be active, not everything true must be bright, and not everything enduring must be loud enough to wake the mind. And perhaps by now, your own thoughts have begun to understand that, loosening into gentler shapes, surrendering their edges, becoming less like tasks and more like faint drifting particles suspended in the dark. And if they do, let them drift, let them settle, let them follow the old comet into this more inward phase, because this relaxing story is not trying to bring you anywhere sharp or sudden. It is only inviting you to float beside something patient enough to make silence feel safe. And now, the farther reaches of the solar system open around us like a vast and cool library after midnight. Every shelf made of distance, every volume written in frost, every corridor lined with stillness, and moving through that quiet library is our little comet, a worn keeper of old material, a preserved remnant from the earliest age of the solar system, when dust and gas circled the young sun, and some small icy bodies were left in the colder margins to keep their ancient mixtures for billions of years. And tonight, even that scientific wonder feels drowsy and soft, because the fact itself does not press forward like a lesson. It simply rests beside you like a folded blanket, reminding you that the universe has long memories and gentle ways of storing them. And the comet is one of those ways, a moving memory chest of frozen compounds and dust grains, drifting through eras so immense that human busyness cannot survive beside them. And maybe that is why the mind grows quieter here, because the scale of the journey makes every small daytime concern feel lighter, smaller, farther away. And the farther the comet goes, the less it seems interested in anything except continuing its old ellipse through the dark, guided by gravity, accompanied by silence, welcomed by cold. And there is such kindness in that kind of purpose, such comfort in a path that requires no performance, only patience. And so as this nighttime story lowers its voice even more, you may picture the comet passing through a region where sunlight falls only as a pale suggestion upon its surface, where the frost is left undisturbed, where the old vents sleep, and where the little traveler becomes almost indistinguishable from the quiet around it, except for the feeling it leaves behind, the feeling of calm endurance, of soft return, of belonging to the dark without being lost in it. And perhaps that feeling is enough now, enough to help you fall asleep, because sleep too is a kind of belonging, a return to an inner night where nothing needs to shine and nothing needs to be solved before morning. And if any final thoughts still hover nearby, let them be as gentle as comet dust, loose enough to drift away, light enough to settle somewhere far behind you, while ahead there is only the peaceful curve of the old orbit and the cool shelter of the outer dark, and our comet dark at the center and faintly frosted at the edges continues onward like a a small lantern that has turned its glow inward, carrying no bright tale now, only the quiet dignity of something ancient and preserved. And this may be the softest lesson of all, that after brightness, there can be calm. After motion, there can be stillness. After the long sunlit passage, there can be the deep and healing rest of cold space. And so, let this gentle bedtime current carry you just a little farther until the comet becomes only a tiny sleeping shape beneath the stars, until the stars themselves become softer and wider apart, until even the story grows thin and feathery around the edges, and all that remains is the sensation of drifting through a patient universe where old ice dreams in silence, where distance feels protective, where calm is allowed to last, and where calming narration dissolves so gently into the dark that it leaves you at the threshold of deep sleep, peaceful, weightless, and already almost gone into dreams. Now the comet moves within a region so calm and far-reaching that this sleep story seems to float more than speak. And as we follow beside it into the quiet vault of the outer dark, where sunlight arrives only as a soft and distant memory, the little traveler appears almost completely at rest, not stopped, never fully still, but so patient in its motion that it seems to glide inside a silence older than language. And perhaps this is the most soothing part of all, because here the comet asks for nothing except space enough to continue its ancient curve, carrying its frost-dark nucleus through a realm where time feels stretched thin and gentle, where even the stars look less like points and more like tiny sleeping lanterns laid carefully across the black. And as this bedtime story settles further into its own hush, you may imagine the comet as a small and weathered keeper of winter, a body of ice, dust, and stone that once wore a luminous veil near the sun and now has folded that brightness away, returning again to the simpler dignity of cold. And there is something deeply peaceful in that return, because it suggests that quiet is not emptiness, but home, not absence, but restoration. And so our ancient wanderer continues beneath the enormous stillness with the soft confidence of something that has traveled this route before, something that knows the long way outward, something that does not fear dimness, because dimness is part of its rhythm. And perhaps your own thoughts, hearing this relaxing story, have begun to follow the same example, growing less bright, less hurried, less determined to remain separate from one another, until they begin to drift like fine particles in a dark and forgiving sky. And if they do, let them drift. Let them become as light as comet dust, as slow as orbital time, as faint as the last suggestion of a tail long since dissolved into space. Because there is no need to keep holding every thought in sharp focus now. No need to gather up the day or measure what remains undone when the whole universe around this old traveler seems to be whispering the same gentle lesson, that rest comes more easily when nothing is forced. And now the comet turns little by little, its surface ridges and hollows cooling under the weak reach of the sun, its older vents quiet beneath settled frost, its ancient materials preserved in the cold, the way memory is preserved in a lullaby, softened by repetition, carried by rhythm, and never hurried toward toward a conclusion. And if one more sleepy scientific wonder wishes to rest near you tonight, it may be this: that comets spend so much of their existence far from the sun, in long, cold passages where their more volatile materials can remain frozen for vast stretches of time. And that long preservation is part of what makes them such calm archives of the early solar system, little drifting storehouses of old ingredients and ancient chemistry. And even that fact feels quiet here, not like a lecture, but like a blanket laid carefully over the shoulders of the mind. Because the farther outward we go, the more everything becomes about gentleness, about endurance, about the serene patience of a body that does not need to perform its wonder every moment in order to remain wondrous. And now the darkness ahead seems less like a destination than a shelter, a deep blue corridor opening without end, where our comet moves as though entering room after room of a silent celestial house, each one cooler than the last, each one calmer than the last, each one better suited to gentle bedtime and the soft surrender of the waking mind. And if you listen closely, not with effort, but with that drowsy part of yourself that is already leaning toward dreams, you may feel that the whole journey has become simpler, because the comet no longer needs a tail to be beautiful, no longer needs a shining coma to be worth following. And perhaps you do not need all your waking brightness either, not tonight, not now, not when calming narration is enough, and the slow passage of an ancient icy traveler is enough, and the cool imagination of space is enough to help you fall asleep. And so we remain here, moving with the comet through the outer hush, while the stars keep their distance, and the sun stays far behind like a small amber memory. And everything about the scene grows quieter still, until the nucleus seems almost to disappear into the dark around it. Not lost, only blended, only held, only resting in the same wide silence that now begins to gather around your thoughts as well. And if sleep is very near, let it come the way the comet entered this farther region, gradually, naturally, without any abrupt edge. Let the last bright fragments of the day grow dim and cool. Let your mind become a wide and peaceful orbit with nothing left to chase. And let this nighttime story become softer than speech, softer than distance, softer even than memory, until there is only the feeling of moving through a patient universe where old ice sleeps, old paths endure, and every quiet thing is allowed to remain quietly beautiful. And there, beneath that immense and frosted calm, let yourself drift into deep sleep, as gently as a comet returning to the long and tender silence that has always been waiting for it. And now, as this drifting sleep story continues deeper into the quiet outer dark, our ancient comet moves with such patience that it almost seems to be resting even while it travels. And there is something profoundly calming in that, because here in the colder reaches of the solar system, the old traveler no longer carries the bright silver bloom it once wore near the sun, but instead returns to a simpler and softer presence, a small frost-dark nucleus gliding through the immense blue-black hush, as though the universe itself were cradling it in slow and careful hands. And if you imagine it now, turning gently in the distance, you may notice how peaceful it feels to follow something that does not rush, something that does not demand attention, something that simply keeps to its long and faithful path through silence. And perhaps that is why this bedtime story grows quieter with every chapter, because the comet teaches that not all beauty is luminous, not all wonder is loud, and not all journeys are meant to feel like motion. For some journeys, like this one, feel instead like a deepening of rest, a lengthening of stillness, a slow folding of brightness into the more protective softness of dark. And now, the stars all around us seem settled in place, like tiny lanterns left burning in distant rooms of a house where everyone has already fallen asleep, while our comet continues through the hallway between them, dim and patient and untouched by hurry, carrying inside itself old ice, old dust, old memory from the earliest era of the solar system. And yet, tonight, those ancient facts are less like lessons and more like blankets, because the mind does not need to hold them tightly, only to feel their cool and steady comfort, to know that this little traveler has come from very far away, has circled through warmth and returned again to cold, and is perfectly content to let distance gather around it like a cloak. And perhaps your own thoughts are ready to do the same now, ready to stop shining so brightly, ready to loosen their edges and drift farther apart until they become as fine and weightless as comet dust spread thin along an invisible orbital road. And if they do, let them drift, let them settle, let them become part of the quiet atmosphere of this nighttime story, because nothing here is asking to be solved, and nothing here is asking to be remembered with effort, and nothing here is asking you to stay awake any longer than you need to. And now, the comet's surface, rough with ancient contours and long-weathered hollows, cools beneath a light so faint it can barely wake the frost. And because of that faintness, everything about the traveler feels gentler, more inward, more at peace with its own silence, as though it has entered a deep cosmic winter, where every hidden pocket of ice can sleep undisturbed, and every old vent can rest after its brief season of sunlight. And there is something very tender in imagining that long rest, that immense stretch of cold time through which the comet continues its quiet orbit, not lonely, never lonely, but accompanied by the stars, by gravity, by memory, by the calm certainty of returning to the regions where ancient wanderers are allowed to be still for ages. And if you listen with the sleepy part of your imagination, you may feel that the whole scene has become almost like a lullaby without music, a relaxing story told in distance and frost instead of melody, where the comet itself is the slow refrain, returning again and again through darkness, never hurried, never harsh, always moving with the grace of something that understands the value of long silences. And perhaps that can help you fall asleep now, because sleep too is a kind of orbit, a trusted returning, a gentle curve away from brightness and toward a quieter inner space where the mind no longer has to hold itself upright. And so we remain beside the comet as it passes through the stillness between the frosted stars, and every moment seems softer than the one before, every thought more feathered, every image more blurred at the edges, until even the old traveler ahead begins to seem less like a solid object and more like a feeling of calm given shape. A small dark lantern moving through a vast and welcoming hush. And the farther it goes, the more the surrounding dark feels less like emptiness and more like shelter, more like a wide and cool room prepared for rest, where no voice rises, no light intrudes, no sudden motion interrupts the peace, and in that shelter, you may let go of one more thought, and then another, until your mind becomes as spacious as the orbit itself, and the story becomes softer than language, softer than memory, softer even than the idea of following. And if any final image remains as you drift toward deep sleep, let it be this one: the comet continuing onward through the far cold reaches, with its quiet dignity intact, carrying ancient ice beneath a settled crust, gliding under the patient stars, surrounded by silence so complete that it feels almost warm in its gentleness. And we beside it in imagination, no longer needing to ask where it is going or how long it will take, because the answer no longer matters, and the only important thing now is the peace of the journey itself. The old orbit, the faint frost, the endless dark made kind by distance, and the slow, steady hush that wraps around you like a blanket of cool starlight, easing you further and further into gentle bedtime, into calming narration, into the deepest and most untroubled rest. And now, as this last chapter of our gentle sleep story settles around you like cool velvet laid over a quiet room, the old comet continues on its far and patient path, moving so softly through the outer dark that it almost seems to disappear into the stillness that has always been waiting for it. And we go no farther than this, because this is the place where the journey becomes rest, where the story becomes a whisper, where the whisper becomes only breath, and where even breath begins to feel as light as frost settling on ancient ice. And if you imagine the comet now, you do not need to see every contour of its surface or every faint trace of its old path, because it is enough simply to feel it there ahead of you, a small and sleeping lantern of dust and ice, gliding beneath silent stars, no longer wearing its bright tails, no longer breathing out great silver veils, but carrying all of that former radiance folded inward, as though the memory of sunlight had become a soft glow hidden deep inside its old and weathered heart. And perhaps that is the final comfort the comet offers tonight, that even when brightness fades, peace remains. Even when motion slows into near stillness, beauty remains. Even when the journey reaches the far cold reaches of space, there is no loneliness in it, only the great calm of distance, the tender hush of a universe vast enough to hold every quiet thing without disturbing it. And so, this bedtime story lowers its voice once more, because there is nothing left to explain, nothing left to hurry toward, only the slow and soothing certainty that the comet will continue its old ellipse without needing your attention. And you may rest now, knowing that some travelers are patient enough to keep moving on your behalf, carrying wonder quietly onward while you drift away from waking thought. And perhaps your own mind has become very much like the comet now, dark at the center in the gentlest way, wrapped in a soft haze of fading impressions, letting the brighter pieces of the day fall away like fine dust from an ancient orbit, each thought becoming lighter, each memory less sharp, each small concern settling farther behind you until nothing remains close enough to trouble your rest. And if a final image wishes to stay for a little while, let it be this one, the comet passing through a deep blue corridor of stars that seem half asleep themselves, while the sun is only a tiny warmth far behind, and the great outer silence opens ahead like a cool meadow with no fences and no end, and through that meadow the traveler glides, unafraid, unhurried, and entirely at home. And as you follow for a few last drifting moments, you may feel that the room around you has grown softer too, the blankets heavier, the air quieter, the space behind your eyes darker and kinder, until this nighttime story is no longer something you listen to, but something you float inside, something that carries you the way the orbit carries the comet, without effort, without interruption, without asking anything more from you. And now even the stars seem farther apart, as though they are making more room for sleep, and the comet ahead becomes smaller, dimmer, more peaceful, until it is only a tiny resting shape in the distance, and then only a feeling, and then only the idea of an old frozen traveler continuing through the dark, while you no longer need to continue with it because you have already come far enough. And this relaxing story has brought you where it meant to bring you, to the edge of thought, to the threshold of dreaming, to the quiet place where words stop being words and become a slow current carrying you into deeper and deeper calm. And if you notice your breathing now, let it remain easy and unforced, like the movement of the comet itself. And if you notice any final thoughts still shining faintly in the mind, let it dim naturally, let it cool, let it drift outward until it joins the gentle dark with everything else that no longer needs to be held, because there is no more work for tonight, no more searching, no more remembering, only rest, only surrender, only the lovely fact that somewhere in the immense and sleeping universe, an ancient comet continues its quiet journey. And here in your own small and peaceful corner of night, you may do the same by letting go, by floating down, by allowing this calming narration to fade to the softest murmur and softer still, until the story is only the faintest thread, until the thread dissolves completely, until the dark around you feels warm in its stillness and wide in its kindness. And then, very gently, very slowly, without any need to notice the exact moment it happens, let yourself fall asleep. Let yourself sink into deep sleep, and let the final drift of this old comet become the final drift of your waking mind, disappearing peacefully into the tender and endless quiet.